Welcome back to the table, friends. I'm your humble host, Grady Ems. With me, as always, is Owen.
Hi.
Once again, we gather around the table to have Owen teach us in his dulcet
Monotone.
Hey,
mispronouncing ass.
I believe we all know who the king of monotones is, and we all miss him at the table, so.
I wish you were here.
But okay, silliness aside, what have you come to enlighten us with, Owen?
Well, first I want to start with a question. What happens when a bunch of RPG designers decide they're tired of Dungeons, Dragons, and 300-page rulebooks written like legal contracts?
They burn them.
For warmth.
Huddled around the fires of the Great Second Depression. Times are good back when I had a job at that automotive plant.
I'm sorry, that's not the answer you were looking for. You get Fiasco, you get Monster Hearts, you get Apocalypse Worlds and Blades in the Dark. You get a revolution, one quietly written in zines, crowdfunded PDFs, and late-night forum threads. No corporate backing, no safety net, just raw creativity and a lot of people saying, what if we did it differently? So, today, I'm going to talk about the rise of the indie tabletop RPG scene. We're going to trace how a scrappy, rule-breaking movement grew from home-brewed PDFs and forum flame wars into a design philosophy and reshaped the hobby. From the early days of the Forge to the narrative expositions of Powered by the Apocalypse. This is the story of games that changed the game. So grab your weirdest dice, forget your initiative order, and we're going to roll with it. That's going to be my thing from now on.
We're going to roll with it.
Maybe. I don't know. We'll see how it goes.
Okay. That was fun for me on so many levels. Because there was the weird awkwardness, and then there was the second point of realizing you were like, I'm testing the waters on this, and I'm not sure how I want to feel about it. Am I kind of proud about this, or am I not?
Get in the comments. Let us know.
That was beautiful.
See if I continue to roll with it. All right. Let's get back on track. In the earliest days of RPGs, the hobby was dominated by big commercial titles like Dungeons and Dragons. One of these days, we'll probably talk about D&D. I hear it's pretty big.
Yeah, I mean, like, just, it's what eventually we'll get around to it. I'm sure people are like, oh, that's weird. What is that? And we'll just have to be like, okay, well, we have to talk about this thing,
These traditional games focused on extensive rules, long campaigns, and publisher-controlled content. But even as RPGs entered the mainstream, some designers were already experimenting with new approaches. In the 1980s and 90s, a few early RPGs departed philosophically from the norm, planting seeds for the indie revolution to come. For example, Amber Diceless RPG from 1991 threw out dice entirely in favor of pure narrative and player decision-making, a radical idea at the time. Games like Over the Edge from 1992 by Jonathan Tweet and Robin D. Laws introduced free-form character creation in modern setting, emphasizing story and theme over combat mechanics. Meanwhile, White Wolf's Vampire the Masquerade from 1991 showed that a game could put story and mood first even under a major publisher. It was not the first horror RPG nor the first to emphasize story over mechanics, but it rode a cultural wave by focusing on personal drama and a narrative metaplot. These early departures demonstrated that players were hungry for more than dungeon crawls. They wanted improvisational storytelling, deeper characters, and a new genre. Another crucial development of the 90s was the rise of fan communities and theory discussions via early internet forums. On Usenet and in amateur press publications, RPG enthusiasts began analyzing game design itself. In 1997, the threefold model emerged on Rec.Games forums, attempting to classify RPG playstyles: dramatist, gamist, simulationist, an early stab at understanding why we play. In 1999, designer Robin D. Laws wrote a call for serious RPG criticism, knowing that while games reviews were common, true critical discussion on RPGs as an art form was an unplowed field. All this set the stage for an indie design community that would soon crystallize and push these ideas further. The tools were also falling into place. By the late 90s, desktop publishing software and the new PDF file format made it possible for creators to self-publish their own RPG books cheaply. The scene was nearly ready for an indie RPG renaissance, which we did talk about a little bit of a renaissance in my last podcast.
Yeah, I think that one just went live. Nope. Maybe next time. Nope. No, dude. This week.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know why we're talking about it like it didn't happen yet. I mean, what do you mean?
I don't know.
You're not like storing these up or anything.
No, not at all.
No. So, around the turn of the millennium, the indie RPG movement truly ignited, largely thanks to an online forum called The Forge. Co-founded by game designer Ron Edwards and colleagues between 1999 and 2001, The Forge became the gathering place for creators who wanted full control over their games outside the traditional industry. At its core was a philosophy: system does matter. Ron Edwards' influential essays argued that the rules of a game shape the story experience, and designers should craft mechanics to support specific themes. Forge members embraced new design theories like GNS, that's the gamism, narrative, simulationism, classifying different player goals, and the big model of RPG design. The Forge community generally defined indie games as those where creators maintain control and avoid traditional publishing. Designs were typically tightly focused on a premise of emotional experience, not generic rule sets. This was a sharp break from sprawling games that tried to do everything. It was a true renaissance of creativity in the early 2000s. Small press, big ideas.
Well, I think it was the whole thing about, like, games that tried to do everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, like when you get a statistician show up out of college and he's just like, I am going to make statistically the greatest game ever made. Or just GURPS.
I was waiting for that.
I've been waiting to figure out how I'm going to get the angle in. It's like, where's the GURPS bashing going to be in? Join the anti-GURPS league.
Thankfully, I knew better than to bring that up in this.
Yes.
So, Ron Edwards himself led by example. He had created a dark fantasy game called Sorcerer and initially sold it as a for-pay PDF online. After seeing another small press RPG for sale at Gen Con 2000, Edwards realized he could publish Sorcerer in print on his own terms. In 2001, he did exactly that, releasing Sorcerer as a hardcover under his own Adept press. RPG historians note that this is a turning point for indie RPGs, as Edwards showed independent game designers the way to publish their own games. The impact was immediate. In 2002, Ron Edwards and Sorcerer won the prestigious Diana Jones Award for Excellence in Gaming, with the award citation praising how Sorcerer and the Forge community represented the potential of the independent innovator in today's RPG industry. In other words, a self-published game had proven that indies could achieve excellence on par with any big publisher. Edwards was even honored as Human of the Year in the Indie RPG Awards of 2002 for helping folks get started, promoting other games, and generally being an amazing resource. The Forge rapidly grew as a hub of design discussion, playtesting, and moral support for creators. Key people drove this movement forward. Along with Edwards, there was Clinton R. Nixon, who helped run the Forge site and publish his own games, and Ed Healy, who co-founded the original site. A wave of talented designers, authors congregated there, many of whom became influential. One was Luke Crane, who released The Burning Wheel in 2002, a dense fantasy game focused on character-driven stories and complex Artha reward mechanics. Crane would later say the Forge taught him the importance of creator-owned publishing. Another Forge regular, Paul Seegey, designed My Life with Master in 2003, a haunting game where you play the tormented minions of an evil villain, an early example of tackling a very specific narrative arc in an RPG. Seegey's work was widely acclaimed for its innovative approach. It later won multiple indie awards. Emily Claire Boss brought romance and personal relationships into RPGs with games like Breaking the Ice in 2005, a two-player story of characters dating. That one seems a little weird.
Really?
Hey, Bob, you want to
play Breaking the Ice?
Play Breaking the Ice?
So my husband's really enjoying this two-player experience with his DM, and I'm getting a little worried. So they wanted to go on a role-play trip? Like they were going to stay in character the whole time?
staying player character the whole time.
The whole time.
They're going on a cruise?
Yeah, it's like there's a bunch of other. Oh my god. Oh, we have to. Never mind. We'll have to cut this out, but like we'll have to talk about that later on.
All right.
Just remember, bring up the cruise thing again.
All right. Yeah. So, and then there was Vincent Baker, who would soon become a superstar of indie design. During the Forge's heyday, about 2001 to 2005, many influential games were released, each exploring uncharted territory. Some highlights include Sorcerer 2001. This is Ron Edwards' game, a modern-day demon summoner, providing the viability of PDF indie publishing. It exemplified the Forge idea of creator-owned, tightly focused design. In this case, on the price of power and characters' moral choices. The Burning Wheel, we spoke about that a little while ago. It's 2002. Luke Crane's deep fantasy system with its own unique mechanics, like belief and instinct rules, bridging traditional fantasy adventures with indie-style character drama. Burning Wheel built a devoted fan base and showed that indie didn't have to mean rules light. It meant creator-driven vision. Dogs in the Vineyard, 2004. Vincent Baker's breakout game, which cast players as young, Mormon-inspired God's watchdogs, dispensing justice in a mythical Wild West. Yeah, this one seemed really interesting. Dogs was one of the first indie RPGs to achieve both financial success and wide cultural impact. It introduced novel mechanics like escalating conflicts with dice and the famous advice to say yes or roll the dice, encouraging GMs to let players' ideas drive the story unless a risky outcome was more interesting. Dogs in the Vineyard won the 2004 Indie RPG Game of the Year and Innovative Awards and was even a finalist for the 2004 Diana Jones Award. This was a game changer, literally, that influenced countless designers. My Life with Master, 2003, Paul Seegey's elegant, tragic game that practically scripts a gothic novella, following minions who may eventually overthrow their evil master or succumb. It demonstrated how an RPG's mechanics can enforce a dramatic story structure. Primetime Adventures 2004 by Matt Wilson, which had players create their own TV shows and episodes using screen presence rules to emulate television drama. This was an early GM light story game that felt entirely different from D&D, more like collaborative screenwriting. And the big one for Gray here, Breaking the Ice 2005. Emily Kerr Boss's two-player romance game, which dared to make dating the entire focus. It proved that no topic was off limits for indie RPGs. Even an awkward first date could be fertile ground for play. Boss and others in the Forge scene also foregrounded inclusive design, welcoming women designers into a space often dominated by men. And finally, Shock, social science friction. Friction? No. Social Science Fiction, 2006, by Joshua A.C. Newman, a sci-fi game explicitly about tackling social issues via speculative scenarios. Shock and its ilk showed indies delving into thoughtful, political, and social themes beyond swords and sorcery. So these are just a few examples. The Forge community produced dozens of intriguing games. What they had in common was a willingness to experiment with format and rules to better serve the story. They are often self-published as PDFs or print-on-demand books sold directly by creators online or at convention booths. Indeed, by Gen Con 2002, Edwards had organized an official Forge booth where multiple indie designers shared space to sell their games. This collective presence at the world's biggest game convention was both a practical help, splitting cost, and a symbolic declaration: the indies have arrived. The Forge's influence on design theory was equally profound. Discussions on its forums refined concepts like scene framing, how to cut straight to interesting moments in play, and shared narrative control, which would later spread across the hobby. The forum itself went through seasons, with a peak around 2003 to 2004 when thousands of posts per month debated RPG theory. By 2005, Edwards felt the core theory, the big model, was complete, and he infamously shut down the theory boards to focus on practical design talk. The Forge era formally lasted until 2012, when the forums finally closed, but by then the movement had already spilled out into a wider Forge dysphoria of other blogs and communities. The genie was out of the bottle. Indie RPG design was now a thriving scene of its own.
Dun, dun, dun.
It's out. Pandora's box has been opened.
Yeah. Kind of. But
So as the mid-2000s gave way to the late 2000s, the indie RPG movement continued to gain momentum and diversity. Many early pioneers moved on to new projects and fresh voices joined the fray. The term story games came into use, often synonymous with the indie RPGs, highlighting their focus on collaborative story creation. New forums like Story Games, launched in 2006 and active through the 2010s, picked up where the Forge left off, providing a more informal gathering place for designers and fans of narrative games. The creative energy was high, and importantly, recognition from the wider industry grew. Indie games became winning mainstream awards and attracting media attention, proving these quirky upstarts were more than just a curiosity. Several hugely influential games hit the scene in the late 2000s, demonstrating the breadth of what the indie RPGs could do. Fiasco in 2009, perhaps the definitive indie story game by Jason Morningstar's Fiasco, is a GM-less game about small-time capers gone horribly wrong. Inspired by Coen Brothers-style dark comedy, players collaboratively set up a scenario like bumbling criminals or reckless youths and then play out a caper that will inevitably spiral into a disaster, a fiasco, so to speak. The game uses only some 6-sided dice and index cards, but delivers a cinematic experience. Fiasco was a breakthrough hit. It won the 2011 Diana Jones Awards for Excellence in Gaming, marking it as one of the very best games of any kind that year. It also reached new audiences. In 2012, actor Will Wheaton featured Fiasco on an episode of his popular Tabletop web show. Viewers watched Wheaton and friends gleefully improvise a tale of mayhem, showcasing how accessible and entertaining indie RPGs could be. Wired magazine noted that Fiasco is a story-based RPG that's like no role-playing game you've ever heard of before, playing out like a Coen Brothers movie where everything goes wrong. That episode became a fan favorite, and suddenly Fiasco was on the radar of many gamers who'd never heard of GM-less play before. It's hard to overstate Fiasco's influence. It proved that even without a game master or prep, players could craft an unforgettable story in a single session. The game's design also cemented the idea of play sets, plug-in scenario templates, which allowed endless replayability and community-made content. Grey Ranks in 2007 was Jason Morningstar's earlier game. Grey Ranks tackled historical tragedy. Players are teenage resistance fighters during the doomed 1944 Warsaw Uprising in World War II. Heavy. This emotionally heavy game demonstrated that indie designers were not afraid to handle serious real-world themes in a thoughtful way. Grey Ranks also earned critical acclaim and won awards, showing that story games could have artistic ambitions on par with literature or film. Mouse Guard, 2008. Designed by Luke Crane, adapting the Mouse Guard comic, this game was published by Archaeus Studios Press, a small publisher, but it showed indie design principles reaching a broader audience through a beloved IP. Mouse Guard simplified Crane's own Burning Wheel system to make a beginner-friendly game about brave mice with swords. It won the 2009 Origins Award for Best RPG, a traditionally mainstream award. This indicated that the line between indie and mainstream was blurring. A game with indie DNA, creator-owned style, narrative focus, achieved commercial success and recognition. And finally, Apocalypse World 2010. This is the big one. Apocalypse World by Vincent Baker and Mayui Baker, I think that's how you pronounce the name, exploded into the scene and fundamentally changed the landscape of indie RPGs. It's a gritty, post-apocalyptic game of survival and interpersonal drama. Think Mad Max meets an R-rated character-driven TV show. Mechanically, it introduced a brilliant framework of play called Power by the Apocalypse, or PBTA. In Apocalypse World, every character has moves or actions that trigger specific outcomes. Resolved with a 2d6, a high roll succeed, a middling roll is a complicated success, and a miss means trouble. The success with complication system ensured the story always surged forward. Characters would rarely stagnate or outright fail. Even bad rolls meant the plot thickened in interesting ways. The genius of Apocalypse World was how it baked the genre's fiction into the rules, when you try to seduce or manipulate someone, so to speak, and how it gave the game master, the master of ceremonies they call it, clear principles to play by. Crucially, the bakers offered the PBTA system openly to the community as a kind of design template. They encouraged others to hack, remix, and create new games using the Apocalypse World engine. Vincent and Mayui explicitly said, "If you like this framework, go make your own games with it." That open invitation launched an entire movement of PBTA games. Apocalypse World itself won multiple awards: Indie RPG Game of the Year 2010, Most Innovative Game, Best Support, and the 2011 Golden Geek RPG of the Year, among others. It earned accolades for its groundbreaking design, was praised for unique features like its messy, complicated relationships mechanic and provocative setting. But perhaps AW's biggest legacy is the hundreds of hacks it inspired. By 2010, indie designers had a shared language, thanks to AW. The idea of moves, player books, or character archetypes, and agenda principles for GMs. So that's a big one that kind of set the stage, but this next one is what built on it. And that's called Dungeon World. That's 2012. This game by Sage Latora and Adam Coble took Apocalypse World's framework and applied it to classic fantasy adventuring. So they took the Apocalypse and they put D&D on top of it.
Yep.
In effect, Dungeon World merged D&D tropes, fighter, wizards, dungeons, with the narrative, rules-light PBTA approach. The result was hugely popular. In fact, Dungeon World is credited with kicking PBTA into the mainstream by tying the system back to Dungeons & Dragons, the hobby's most popular game. For many traditional gamers, Dungeon World was a perfect gateway drug into indie design. It felt familiar in subject matter, but played very differently, emphasizing fictional positioning and story outcomes over tactical minutiae. The game's Kickstarter in 2012 was a big success, and by 2013, Dungeon World won a Golden Eni Award and Best Rules. The Angry GM, a popular commentator, noted that Dungeon World arguably turned PBTA into a mainstream term in the online gaming community for a while. It was easy to learn, quick to play, and showed even die-hard D&D fans the virtues of fiction-first gaming. From this point on, PBTA games popped up everywhere. As one journalist humorously observed, it got so you couldn't swing a dead tabaxi on drive-thru RPG without hitting a PBTA game. Early PBTA follow-ups included Monster Hearts, Monster of the Week, Urban Shadows, and many more, each taking the core AW idea and doing something new.
Powered by the apocalypse, indeed.
Yep. Absolutely. Another late 2000 trend was the rise of GM-less or GM-light games beyond Fiasco. Shock social science fiction, we mentioned, was another game. Others include Quiet Year by Avery Elder, a map drawing game about a community rebuilding after an apocalypse, and Microscope 2011 by Ben Robbins, a fascinating fractal history game where players collaboratively create an epic timeline out of order. These games often required no preparation and shared narrative authority among players, embodying indie values of collaboration and experimentation. The distribution methods for indie games also evolved in this period. PDF sales through sites like RPG Now and DriveThruRPG became commonplace. Many indies sold directly to fans at conventions or through their own websites, rather than relying on retail. In 2013, the Kickstarter crowdfunding boom hit tabletop RPGs, enabling indie creators to raise funds upfront and gauge interest. For example, the Fate Core RPG, an open rules system by Evil Hat Productions, raised over $400,000 on Kickstarter in 2013, a massive sum for an RPG at the time, showing that fans could financially back innovative games. Crowdfunding became a common model of promotion, funding, and distribution for indie RPGs by the 2010s, with creators using Kickstarter to not only fund development, but also as a marketing platform. This allowed many small games that would never find a traditional publisher to come to life. The late 2000s also saw the founding of Indie Press Revolution, IPR, a dedicated distributor for indie tabletop games, which helped creators get their books into game stores under a unified banner. In short, by 2010, the infrastructure for indie RPGs was firmly established. A network of online communities, digital marketplaces, crowdfunding, and convention support, such as Indie Games on Demand events where volunteers demo indie games at cons. The indie scene was no longer a niche. It was a lively part of RPG hobby, producing games that won top awards and influenced designers everywhere. And if you go to your local hobby shop and look at some of their walls, you will see proof of that.
Yep.
How many games exist now that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, nothing was there.
No, and especially because this kind of touches back on our previous, like the old school Renaissance, whereas this concept that people were really trying to come up to redefine what it means to be a TTRPG, right? And like I said, there's this kind of design element of like, hey, the rules should tailor an experience.
Yeah.
And that like this kind of goal of creating a system that essentially provides every experience known to man is not a goal to be attained. And instead you should be like, hey, I've created a very detailed rules that describe this type of narrative action supremely well.
Right.
And if you need to tell a different story, you're probably going to need to walk away from it.
Right. Yep. So, if the 2000s were about proving the indie model, the 2010s were about indie games taking over the conversation in RPG design. After Apocalypse World and Dungeon World, dozens upon dozens of PBTA titles emerged, each with a unique flavor. Want a game of teenage superheroes grappling with identity? There's Masks, a new generation, released in 2016 by Brendan Conway. How about urban fantasy Monster Hunters? Monster of the Week, created in 2012 by Michael Sands, scratches that Buffy supernatural itch. Political Urban Shadows? Urban Shadows, created in 2015. Even the Star Wars universe got an unofficial PBTA treatment via fan hacks called Star Wars World. The pattern was clear. The Baker's Open invitation empowered a generation of designers. By late 2024, the indie platform itch.io listed over 1,100 products tagged Powered by the Apocalypse. And that's just those who chose that tag. Powered by the Apocalypse became almost a genre unto itself. However, PBTA was not the only game in town. John Harper, a veteran indie creator known for stylish minimalist games, delivered another paradigm shift with Blades in the Dark, kickstarted in 2015 and released in 2017. Blades in the Dark is a slick, dark fantasy game where players are a crew of criminals pulling off heists in an industrial haunted city. It introduced the Forged in the Dark system, which, like PBTA, would become a platform for many spin-offs. Blades mechanics were innovative, a flexible action rating system, a concept of position and effect to judge outcomes, and the brilliant use of flashbacks to allow players to retroactively plan heists on the fly. It also built in crew advancement and downtime phases, marrying the structured play of a video game like Dishonored or Thief with the openness of an RPG. Blades in the Dark hit big. It won an ENnie Award in 2018 for Best Game and was nominated for Product of the Year. More tellingly, its publisher, Evil Hat, reported strong sales, and the game's Kickstarter success, nearly $180,000 pledged, proved that fans would pay for cutting-edge indie design. Soon, Forged in the Dark hacks arrived, Scum and Villainy for space opera, Band of Blades for dark military fantasy. By the late 2010s, Blades and Apocalypse World were like twin pillars of the indie design scene, one emphasizing narrative moves, the other emphasizing cinematic action and planning, and both are richly inspiring new creators. The scope of indie RPG themes continued to broaden in the 2010s. Designers explored representation and identity in new ways. A notable example, Thirsty Sword Lesbians in 2021 by April Kit Walsh.
That's a game I can get behind.
A proudly queer, swashbuckling romance RPG that runs on PBTA variant. This game was so well crafted and joyful in its celebration of queer themes that it became the first RPG ever to win a Nebula Award, a prestigious sci-fi Fantasy Writing Award for Game Writing in 2021. It also won the 2022 ENnie Award for Best Game and Product of the Year. Think about that. An indie RPG about melodramatic, sword-wielding lesbians took home the top prize at one of the biggest RPG award ceremonies, beating out products from major companies. The times had changed. Likewise, Spire 2018 and Heart 2020 by Rowan, Rook, and Descartes in the UK delivered indie-style games, dark, thematically rich, and creator-owned that earned fan acclaim. Another trend was from crossover between indie RPGs and mainstream franchises via licensing. For instance, Magpie Games, an indie publisher formed in 2010, built their business on PBTA-based games and in the late 2010s landed major licenses. They produced Root, the RPG, based on the hit board game using PBTA, and then Avatar Legends, The Last Airbender in 2022, also using PBTA. The Avatar Legends Kickstarter in 2021 raised over $9.5 million, an astronomical sum, and explicitly runs on an indie design framework. This is a profound example of indie mechanics being adopted for popular mass market projects. 10 years prior, no one would have imagined Nickelodeon approving an RPG where tier heroes have playbook moves and 2d6 resolutions. But the success of these projects shows that the philosophy born on forums like The Forge has now permeated big licensing deals. Magpie's trajectory is notable, from small indie hits like Urban Shadows to becoming the largest PBTA publisher and handling huge licenses. It reflects how far the indie scene's credibility has come. I'm going to quickly touch on Old School Renaissance, OSR. Talked about this in a previous podcast, but see it as a kind of a parallel to the indie movement. Started around the 2000s, some creators took advantage of the open games license for D&D 3rd edition to publish their own retro-style D&D clones and adventures. These OSR games, like Labyrinth Lord, Dungeon Crawl Classics, and so on, were independent and creator-controlled, but philosophically they aimed to emulate the simple, deadly dungeon crawls of the 1970s D&D rather than forge new narrative techniques. So moving past that, by the end of 2010s, indie RPGs had fully matured. They weren't a curiosity or sideshow at conventions. They were winning Games of the Year awards, topping sales charts on DriveThruRPG, and attracting new audiences through actual play shows and streams. Shows like Critical Role primarily stuck to D&D, but many other actual play podcasts focus on indie games. One such is Friends at the Table. They showcased a lot of RPGs, and the Adventure Zone podcast did a mini arc with Monster Hearts. This online exposure meant that by 2020, a huge portion of the RPG fandom was at least aware of games like Blades in the Dark, Apocalypse World, Fiasco, Mask, and so on, even if they started with D&D. And it's funny because I think about it and I remember a lot of this stuff coming out. I remember Will Wheaton's podcast, Tabletop Play.
I was addicted to that show.
Yeah, and
kind of ticked off that one way.
Yeah, and then like we were there when Critical Role first started, and we're like, isn't this cool? Some of our favorite voice actors are playing D&D, and then it exploded into this crazy $1 million millions of dollars.
Oh, isn't this cool that our favorite voice actors are playing D&D, or son of a bitch, somebody's playing D&D for money?
Yeah, that was there too.
Yeah, it was.
But I mean,
a scummy version. Years later, it became some of my favorite voice actors. Okay. And I went back.
Yes, there was some anger there immediately.
Oh, no, this initially is a good thing.
Yeah, initially, I remember that.
But also, just also a note, the Adventure Zone, they do play Blades in the Dark too later on.
Oh, do they?
Yeah, I think that was maybe their last game they played. They kind of reframed it to be this weird setting where it's like this theme park that is like eventually like a city of itself.
Okay.
A very kind of weird thing, but like that was one of the last ones that I was listening to. But then again, as time slips on, as you get older and the years, that was like, I can't remember. That was 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So they might have moved on to
way
something
past
completely different now.
Yeah. A lot of this stuff sprung up kind of like in our prime gaming time, if you really think about it. It's weird because we're like, this is great. This is awesome. And we just kind of, I don't know.
Kept playing 5th edition.
Yeah, we didn't take advantage of this building that now seems so obvious.
Well, I think also it's like these things, okay, and maybe this is
kind of took it for granted, I guess I can say.
Yeah, I think it's also, we'll kind of maybe get to this at the end. There's there are some philosophies here that, like, there's some the people can have opinions about this. Okay, let me put it that way.
Yeah.
And one of the things is, if your table is familiar and used to playing something,
Mm-hmm.
there is a notion that people can show up and expect that thing again. It doesn't mean you don't try out new stuff, but it means that there is like this value proposition of, like, because of indie RPGs, you're headed to an infinite amount of ways to tell a story.
Right.
And when that happens, those ways become less valuable.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
No, I absolutely get it.
Whereas, like, a system that everybody knows gains value because anybody can come and sit down and play it.
And at the same time, and at least a scenario that we've run into several times, is not everybody can make it to every game. And if somebody misses out one game and comes back and it's a different game, like, that kind of weakens the feel of it, where if you know what you're coming back to, you might have missed the narrative that happened last time, but at least you still know the game.
Yeah, and another thing that, like, happens, especially when you're hopping game systems, is that people start interjecting what they are familiar with into the game system.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not really playing the new game system. Because we played, like, Kids on Bikes.
Yeah.
And we really didn't play Kids on Bikes.
No.
Like, we played another weird thing that we did, but, like, we weren't really following what Kids on Bikes is. We were playing our own version of it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's not anybody's fault. It's just what happens when the same group of people play the same games so often.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I said, there's a lot of, like, it's interesting. It's very good that people have a chance to go out and basically create and control, like, their products here, these RPGs. Like, that's a good thing. And when good ideas prosper, we all do better. But that being said, then people start creating these niche things that are just like, well, wait a second. Doesn't the world want to talk about interspecies adventures into small subatomic insertions into body in a scientific setting based on the 80s? I thought that was, like, this is the most clear lacking thing. And like, what?
Wow. I forgot about that movie. Yeah, and that, we'll talk about it at the end. Okay. I don't want to kind of get too off topic here, but so culturally, the indie scene also influenced the ways people play and talk about RPGs. The idea of a session zero, a preliminary game session to discuss expectations, tones, and boundaries, was practiced in indie circles long before it became common advice for all gamers. The concept of openly discussing your group's social contract and play style was popularized by Forge theorists and is now a staple of gaming blogs and advice columns. Actual play shows that focus on narrative owe a debt to the story-first mentality of indie games. We even see designers outside of tabletop RPGs taking note. Video game developers have cited indie TTRPGs when discussing branching narrative designs and player agency. Ultimately, the mainstream industry's dominant player, D&D, remains a traditionally rooted game at its core, but it now lives in an ecosystem enriched by indie creativity. As one gaming essayist put it in 2019, with 5th edition, D&D is the best it's ever been. It's not a bad game by any means, but it's not driving innovation, and D&D probably never will again. The mantle of innovation has passed to, or rather been seized by, the indie designers, and the big companies are watching and learning from them, even as they continue to produce blockbusters. So, as I finish up, this is a topic that Gray and I touched on in a previous episode, and since Kickstarter was brought up several times in this podcast, I kind of wanted to bring this up. So I kind of wanted to reflect on just some changes. So it's worth reflecting on how indie RPGs, once defined by scrappy PDFs and print-on-demand books, have moved into a new era of shaping by crowdfunding. Back in the early 2010s, games like Dungeon World could raise just over $80,000 on Kickstarter with pledge tiers starting around $10 to $25. Fall of Magic in 2015, an ambitious scroll-based RPG, asked for only $19,500 and hit $75,000 with about 1,000 backers. These campaigns were lean, personal, and grounded in accessibility. But jumped into 2020s, and you're seeing projects like Avatar Legends raise $9.5 million. Old Gods of Appalachia breaking $2 million, and the world's largest dungeon, 20th anniversary edition, offering $500 plus tiers packages with miniatures, posters, and deluxe add-ons.
$1,500 almost in the high end.
God. Today's campaigns often include luxury components, high-end collectibles, and multiple expansion books with an average pledge level of $100 or more. In some cases, even large publishers and licensed IPs companies that don't need crowdfunding are using Kickstarter as a flashy pre-order system, blurring the lines between indie and commercial publishing. The shift has given us some incredible products, but it's also raised the barrier to entry. The indie label now covers everything from a $10 zine on itch.io to a $200 box set with stretch goals stacked to the ceiling. So where does that leave us? Crowdfunding has undeniably empowered creators, but it's also reshaped expectations. Backers are no longer just supporters of passion projects, they're consumers navigating luxury pricing and limited edition FOMO. As the indie scene grows, the challenge will be holding on to its roots in accessibility and innovation, even as the production scale continues to rise.
Fuck FOMO.
I know, it's horrible, isn't it?
It's so powerful.
It is, even when it's something you really don't care about.
I have bins of Kickstarter add-ons that I will never use because of FOMO. That's how, and I'm, like I said, when I'm like, I am, for those who, I don't know, pretty much everybody listening to this knows me, but for those who haven't figured it out, I'm a simple man. I am basically the person who falls for every trap, who suffers from every psychological pitfall known to man because of my unique combination of like, I have to experience this and I'm smart. I could figure it out myself. And so Kickstarter was, you know, the whole reason I got to Kickstarter in the first place was because I had the need for two things that were expensive and didn't really have the money to acquire them. So I wanted Dwarven Forge, and I wanted basically WizKids, miniatures for, which we all know are horrible.
Did you see that thing I posted about the Baldur's Gate?
Oh, it's so just melted faces.
Yeah, looks like they were all in a fight.
Oh, it's just so bad. And like anyway. So, and I ran into basically two Kickstarters that really helped. One of them was Dungeon Lock, which was basically one of the first 3D printable terrains. It was back when like...
Oh yeah, I remember.
It's what we've used continuously because it's all like the stuff I painted up back in the good old days when I naively set up my 3D printer right next to my bed and tried to sleep and couldn't figure out like, why can't I sleep with this object going, Why
does it smell like burning plastic?
Yeah, oh my gosh. Carcinogens are great. And then like the second one was like Reaper Bones when I was just like, I just need a plethora of minis and let me get all these minis. And it had blossomed into a chain of recommendations that took me to the Black Cube.
Yeah.
and like, once again, like I think a momentous moment in my life was the launch of the world's largest dungeon. It had all the hallmarks of something I would buy into. It had the fear of missing out because it was like, hey, we're going to do this. And last time we did this was like 12, 15 years ago. This is going to be a reprint. It had the whole, like, I love mega dungeons. The mega dungeon concept to me is amazing. Like the thing we want to make, the TTRPG, is fundamentally founded on the principle of a mega dungeon and other things. But I love that kind of ideal. So everything in there was like full sale, and they had you'd go in there and you'd say, hey, tell me when you guys launch, remind me, here's like, oh, if you back within the first 48 hours, you get a special pin. Everything's going. It launched up and I went through the offerings, and the first one was like, hey, for $150, you can get the PDF.
That's so ridiculous.
And I was like, what?
This thing that costs us nothing to produce.
And I was like, okay, well, let's scroll to like the deluxe tier. Like what's, because oftentimes the biggest tier is like the merchant tier, but like, let me go like the deluxe all in tier. And I was like, oh, this must be one of those that is like, it's in a European denomination because there's a comma in it, and that doesn't.
No one would have a comma
That's
in one
not
of the tiers.
Oh, it's like $14.99.99, and I was like, what in the world is worth a down payment on a car?
Comes with a jar of our farts.
Basically, it was just, and these aren't like two well-known guys.
Yeah.
These are guys who, like, their claim to fame is having done the previous version of this. And there was a lot of stuff that was cool about it, where they were like, oh, hey, we're going to have this contest and you can make your own room and it's going to be part of this package. But at the same time,
work for us.
yeah, but like at the same time, like, I'm not trying to demonize these guys. I think they're like the inevitable byproduct of this chain of events, but it's to the point where it's like, that's not like they're scaling out. It's like the DLC for video games, right?
Yeah.
Where like at first it's like, oh, 99 cents for horse armor. And then eventually you get to a thing where they release like that Star Wars Battlefront game, and they're like, you have to pay like $1,000 to get Vader or whatever it is. And you're like, who's doing this? And they're like, oh, like 20 random people in the world. And those 20 random people are enough.
Yeah.
And you're like, this is the Gilded Age, man. This is the downfall of like, Western society. This is, RPGs in and of themselves, as you just said, some of the best experiences you could ever have at the table can come from a PDF that cost $1.99. Like, you can just get a set of rules to tell a highly specific story, sit at the table with some friends who are down for a good time, and have like a night to remember for years in the future. But there is an illusion of this like cultivated horde of things that will make your life better, and that you only get one shot at getting, and you will miss out the rest of your life if you do not put that book on the shelf next to the others.
You're not an actual fan if you don't do it.
Yeah.
You're not dedicated enough.
Like, oh no, you got to get this scroll dice case, and you got to get these custom 3D printed mini. Oh, and we're going to print the map on a piece of fabric so that you can hang it up in your room. And like I said, if you guys are hearing, these are things that are filled in every single one of these, because there is now companies that their sole purpose is creating packages to go with the product in the Kickstarter, so you will spend more money.
Yep.
There's like a principle in life, and it happens all the way down from the level of like bugs, where when a resource appears, there are the first people that come to it. And they're the people that get to thrive. They're the creatures that get to thrive. They get to feed off it. They get to monopolize it for a little bit. And then like the mass of infestation hits. And when it hits, no longer can you fight your way to get your little piece of food or your little piece of wealth. And I think we're seeing that now in this space. Like the big players who did these really crazy Kickstarters for cool reasons, like Matt Colville, who started a company based on the results of his first Kickstarter. Awesome. That's so cool. Hey, man, run out there and do really cool things. But now a couple guys digging up one of their old books that was probably pretty cool and charging $1,500 for a package of goodies that no one needs.
Right.
It's a sign of...
It's going to end up in a yard sale 20 years from now.
Basically, I was going through bins, and there's like a Dungeons of Drakenheim, right? So two YouTubers, I'm pretty sure that's the Dungeon Dudes. It's these two guys who basically, hey, they're great guys. They sit there and they do all these YouTube videos where they sit there and they talk about 5th edition, they talk about design principles and all this stuff. And they thought, hey, we're going to come up with our story, and we thought it'd be really cool to make a 5th edition supplement. This is awesome. This is like exactly what society needs, is the ability for people to break away from their corporate jobs, produce content for people to, consume, and then have a chance to throw that into some kind of creative endeavor. So they create their like first Kickstarter. Might have just been the Guide to Drakenheim or the first one. got it. Awesome. Cool. Hey, you can buy the book. The book's like whatever, $50. If you want to spend like $200 or $300, you can get like the fancy book, and we're going to throw in some dice and some stuff because, hey, we're like, this is kind of funny and we're all doing this for the first time. And then like 3 Kickstarters later, it's like Sebastian Crow's Guide to Drakkenheim with a bunch. And I have like the special editions. Of
Oh,
all
I
3
know
books.
you do. I know you do.
I don't think I've ever cracked their covers. And I have a bin full of all the extras, like packs of dice and furry, like little plushies and all this junk that will never serve a purpose. It is, it was raw consumption because I was like, oh, I like these guys and I want to get in this. And, you know, what are you left with? Like, just nothing.
Yeah, I think it's the, you know, you talk about late term capitalism and stuff like that. And it's like, I think we're kind of reaching the same point in the game sphere. You look at I don't know if you saw this or not, but the CEO for Gearbox, they're releasing the next Borderlands game and it's going to be $80. And a lot of people are like, I can't afford $80 for a game. And his response was, well, if you can't figure out how to get $80 for a game, then you're not really a fan.
Oh, what a douchebag.
And I just think that's where we're getting to is people saw there's money to be had and they're just exploiting that so hard. And all video games are doing that. And now it's getting into the indie scene and the tabletop scene and TTRPG scene.
Yeah. And it's kind of sad because $80, like that game probably is worth $80.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you go back and you think that people are buying like Mario Brothers for like $40.
It is like the price of games hasn't really changed even since I was a kid. I remember buying Super Nintendo games for $60. And now you're talking about these epic, you know, Cyberpunk. I mean, I think I paid $50 for that.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, it's crazy. And I agree, you know, but at the same time, the framework that goes into the game, the development that goes into the game, all of that has also become cheaper.
It is. Yeah, it is. But like, there's a lot more. So it's this complicated question because like, I'm agreeing with what you're like. My point is, I agree with you. Is like what he said and what he did in that moment was complete douchebaggery.
Yes.
If the price of video games had scaled appropriately, we're talking AAA titles.
Yeah,
AAA titles had scaled appropriately. We'd all be honest with ourselves and say, hey, like if you're going to buy something that's going to give you 60 to 80 hours of gameplay,
$100 is a decent price.
Yeah, it is. Let's be honest with ourselves. That is the good price for that thing. But you also know that same company could sell like a highly predatory DLC or loot boxes or anything.
Well, and that's the thing. That $80 is the base game, not the deluxe game or the premium game. And the other thing, when we were young and part of the cost of these games was distribution, because you had a physical cartridge, you had a CD, you had something that cost money to put on shelves to ship all over the place. Now everything's a download, and you technically, if anybody's been paying attention lately, there's arguments and there's discussions going on, especially you look at Nintendo. Do you actually own that game, or are you just paying them money to get the privilege to play that game? And can they revoke your right to play that game at any chance that they want?
Yeah, and there's so many weird facets of that too, like the whole concept that if I go out and I spend over the course of my life, whatever, $10,000 on a hobby, and I collect like mineral rocks or whatever, and I put them in a display case, when I pass, that collection, even if it's lost value or gain value, is some form of wealth that will pass on to whoever like I leave behind. My Steam account will get shut down.
Yeah.
It is ephemeral. It is non-existent. It is sunk money into nothing, you know? And that's what corporations want us to have. They want us to be a subscriber.
Everything is a subscription.
Everything is like, we're giving them money and you're getting the chance to play their game for a little bit, the chance to play by their rules for a little bit. And like, this is all so anti-consumer. And it's everywhere. And you know, not to get off topic, but like that's the point of what we're talking about here. Kickstarter was a really cool idea at first. It was like, hey, I want to make a product. I don't have the money to print this book. If I could print this book and I could print 100,000 of them, I could go on to selling these and then print the next ones from the profit and so forth.
Right.
So if you guys pre-sale the first 10,000 of them, then I can afford to print all of them and I can go succeed. It's a great idea. And now you've gotten to the point where the money has been stable for so long. Companies are like, here's our boxed blueprint Kickstarter package. You give us the assets for like your PDF game you want to play. We'll spin up a marketing promotion and like then we'll go put this thing out.
And then you start at $100 and we get 20% of that.
Yeah, it's just, you know, like you said, it's late stage capitalism. It's basically bleeding the people dry, and they're not getting anything in return.
Mm-hmm.
And it's now coming and settling into areas that are so hidden away from the mainstream that we're surprised it finally got here.
Yeah. It's sad.
It is sad. And we didn't mean to depress you. Hey,
we've been talking for a while.
Yeah, you know what? Hey, take solace in the fact that if you're listening to this, you're one of like the 2 who will ever get this far. And you've earned a little bit of shot of the...
You've earned the chance to send us $10.
You've earned the shot of pride of being like,
so
hey,
onto our Patreon.
Hey man, I got a little bit of a pride there that I'm one of the few people that know the secret answer is, you know, blue, green, 5. There we go.
Wouldn't that be weird if like years from now we're famous and somebody walks up and says blue, green, 5?
I'm like, who knows? Who knows? Blue, green, 5 is the hidden password. If you ever encounter us and you say blue, green, 5, there will be something waiting for you, because we know that you're the trooper that fought all the way down to hour or minute 58 of some podcast in which we descend into melancholy reflections on the current state of capitalism.
And with that, I think we're done.
With that, press the button. Please, dear God, press the button.
See you later.
All right, guys, we'll see you later.